when I watched this, I was like, oh man, I hate that kid. I'm like so mad at it. And then I like thought about it. I'm like, I understand like where he's coming from. He's very easy to blame. And I think
Mhm.
that's also kind of the point is that would you, when it came down to it, would you be the same though?
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of A Lost Plot, the podcast by storytellers for storytellers, so that we can tell better stories ourselves. As always, I'm your host, Maverick, and today we have back with us one of our favorite guests. That's right, we have Jared Stonefield here to review a classic in the film universe. We're talking about The Dead Poets Society. This was written by Tom Schulman and directed by Peter Weir, and there is reasons that people still talk about, consider this movie, and I think it has a lot of merit to it. So we're going to talk about that today. As always, Jared, what are your initial impressions and rating for The Dead Poet Society?
So I'll admit, I procrastinated watching this movie for a very long time because I had heard from so many people, you're going to be obsessed with this movie and it's going to break you. And it did both of those things. This movie was just amazing. I love this movie and man, it packs a punch. I think my score overall would be an 8.55. So
Nice.
probably the highest I've definitely given on this podcast.
For sure, for sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I like this movie too. This is one of those few that I've actually purchased for, always watching whenever I feel like it. I mean, it was on sale, but why not? No, but it's a good film. I recalled watching it for the first time, and it wasn't exactly what I expected. But there's a lot of things that they do in this that are kind of unique, and for someone like myself who likes to think about what is the messages and the meaning behind what's being conveyed, this movie is very strong with that stuff, and has a lot going for it in regards to the deeper elements of what it means to be human and struggling through what it means for humanity to take life and grasp it by the bullhorns and get going. So it's great. I really like it. I gave it a 7.95, so almost an 8. Very high for me, and I think there's a reason for that. So we're going to get into that. But if you are unfamiliar with the Dead Poet Society, Jared, could you tell the audience what the Dead Poet Society is about?
Yeah, so it's set at an all boys school up in New England, and basically there's a group of teenage boys that are inspired by their new, rather unorthodox English teacher, Mr. Keating, to basically carpe diem, seize the day, take life by the bullhorns. And, we get to see a lot of snapshots into their lives, their loves, and then unfortunately later in the film, their losses with the death of one of the students. And basically, learning how things like poetry and literature and friendship uh, really can help people in dark times.
Yeah. Yep, that's pretty succinct. A little bit of a spoiler there. So if you aren't looking for spoilers, oh my goodness, pause the podcast, watch the movie, come back and listen. It's definitely got a lot going for it, and even that snapshot gives you a glimpse of that. So we're gonna get right into it as we always do. We're gonna start with that opening scene, right, where you have the introduction to the all boys school. You have them having their procession and the introduction of new students to the class body here at what's the school called? It's like Wheaton Academy or something like
Welton.
that. Welton
Welton.
Academy.
Yeah.
Yeah. What were your thoughts on that opening scene?
That was a great opening scene. Like it totally, it set the tone like for exactly you knew what you were getting into. It was like slightly over the top, but it was still like something that was very realistic and like, oh, this is one of those very prim and proper schools. You kind of get the little bit of like sense of tradition and all that, but it's also very stifling at the same time, and just kind of seeing the funny looks that the kids are giving each other throughout. Like there's entire conversations through just eyes, and I love when that happens in movies. That is one of my favorite things. Using like movies as a visual medium, and you get to like
Yeah.
just have the actors just go crazy. So yeah, that opening scene definitely sets the tone. I love it.
Yeah, the opening scene is definitely it does set the tone for the entire movie. So if you start watching it, right, like 5 minutes in, if you're not intrigued a little bit, this is the film. Like, this is an all boys school. It's all about how young men are struggling with what it means to be a man and what it means to live life. And if you just go, nah, I'm not interested in that, you're not gonna like the film. But but I think it does it very well. And honestly, I would say of all things in the film, it is one of the weaker parts, but not like a way that isn't intriguing to me. It's just not one of those like grabs you by the throat and says, "Watch me," you know.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
it's very good. So
Yep.
I appreciated it. I think that there is something to be said for that slow open, and it just builds from there. So definitely great. You get introduced to this whole cast of characters, so much so in a way that it's not exactly clear who the main character is. What are your thoughts on the main character, or is it main characters? Who is the protagonist of the Dead Poets Society?
This is a question that I was thinking the second the movie started. I was trying to pinpoint which one of the boys was going to be the main character because, again, I knew some things about this movie, but not a lot. And I actually didn't even really know which one was the main character. Um, and so I was trying to figure that out. And there is definitely a bit of ambiguity at first. And then by the end of the movie, you're also like, wait, who was actually the main character?
Uh huh.
Because so many of them have their own storylines that are like given their each of them have their own weight to it, but especially in that opening part, because you get to see snapshots of all those boys lives, and you get really succinct good glimpses into their personalities through a very short amount of time through a very small amount of lines. And I again, I love when movies do that, because when you have a huge cast, you need to introduce them and get them into your viewers heads quick. So I think that starting off, it kind of has Neil and Todd as basically like the main two characters. You could basically call them co-protagonists. But I think that Neil ends up kind of more in the spotlight throughout the story, especially when you have that initial conversation with his father.
Right.
I think that really starts to set him up as like more of the emotional core of the movie, kind of like the pinnacle of the plot. Um, Not that anyone else is unimportant, but it's definitely starting to have more of a weight on him. Yeah, so I'll have more to say, but we'll leave that for later.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that it's fair to say that the waves in this one kind of oscillate between different characters, and so you're not sure watching it going, okay, who are we talking about here? Do we really need to grasp one person? And you can't exactly grasp one person directly, right? And exactly like you said, Todd Anderson is very different from Neil, and who's very different from Knox Overstreet, who's very different from Charlie Dalton, right? And each of these four characters, especially, not even mentioning Meeks or Pitts or these other characters, those four have a very strong presence in the film and get a lot of development as characters. But they have very distinct personalities, and in some ways, you get introduced very early on from John Keating this idea of carpe diem, right? Seize the day. And each of those characters does that, but in a different way, right? Unique to their personality and their individual struggles. And so this is one of those few films, because I generally hate doing the idea like, oh, it's everyone. Everyone's the main protagonist. It's like, no, it's kind of hard to build emotional tension with several characters over a film, so it's better to stick with one. But in this case, I think they do very well at having it be more of a body of people who are saying, like, because they represent different things, right? Todd and his fear, and Neil and his almost like. Well, I'm not even sure how to exactly describe it because it's in some ways brash, some ways bullheaded, but in some ways it's just the pure inspiration of life, if you will, right? Versus Knox, it's about love, and Charlie, it's about his almost like a wild side, tenaciousness to him. They all have these different things going on, and they represent almost like a different facet of what it means to be a young man trying to take on the world and to seize life, right, and drink deeply of it. So, yeah, definitely agree with that sentiment, and this is one of the few times I'd be willing to take that and agree with it. I also am willing to take another stance, which we'll probably talk about near the end of the film, but that's where I'll leave it for now. I don't know if you have additional thoughts.
I do have one additional thought, and that is about Todd Anderson. I was kind of thinking that he was being set up to be like the protagonist of the movie because I guess with just so many movies nowadays, and it's not a bad thing, it's a pretty normal thing, is that normally the audience surrogate is the protagonist. Because, you know, when you have a main character who doesn't really know anything about something, it's very easy to explain things to that character and therefore the audience. And Todd's, you know, totally
Right.
new to all this. So he's getting introduced to all the classmates. He's getting introduced to what Welton is like. But yet, at the same time, a lot of more of like the emotional stakes are kind of being pushed onto Neil because Todd is literally actively avoiding like the gaze of like the characters and the viewers. He's like,
Hmm.
go somewhere else. So
Yeah.
yeah, I just wanted to add that in there. I liked how like the audience surrogate kind of wasn't, but kind of is the protagonist. I don't know. It's
Yeah.
interesting.
Well, and he's not. It's a very useful tool, right? To from a storytelling perspective, to say this is a character who is new to this world, and using it as a explanation, which they don't go super in depth into any like monologuing about this is
Yeah.
how the world is, but they use it well to provide a contrast of these are the established boys, right? These are the guys who have been around for years, and Todd Anderson's the new kid on the block who's being introduced to this group through his roommate Neil Perry. So definitely kind of adds to what we've been saying. But do you think that these characters have interesting character personalities? Are their dynamics compelling in a way that one, they're invested in the story themselves, and two, they have some opportunity for growth and learning here?
I think Neil takes the crown for that. Neil's also my favorite character, so I'm a little biased. But I do think that Neil definitely takes the crown for that because his emotional stakes are introduced very early on. Like the disagreement with his father and not being able to, like, you know, uh, joining the journalism club at school. Like, you get that immediate sense of dissatisfaction. With Todd, I mean, you also get like the potential for growth with him being, you know, very, you know, withdrawn, introverted, and also kind of getting the sense that he actually doesn't really want to be there.
Right.
Um, but again, like they actively kind of like push the camera away from him because he actively fights having the spotlight on him. Again, with like Knox Overstreet, Charlie Dalton. You do get to their storylines, but it's a little bit more like delayed. You kind of figure out more about them as you go on. So I think first and foremost, you definitely get the sense of growth potential from Neil.
Yeah. Yeah, well, especially what's interesting about Todd compared to the other characters, and you see this very clearly in the classroom, right? Is that when they meet the teacher, John Keating, and he has that first class and he's talking about seize the day and how they need to really take the idea of carpe diem and live it to its fullest, the other kids there embrace that pretty early on. They're like, yes, this is what it means to be a man and to be young and alive, to do these things. And Todd is the one that goes, I don't know about that. I don't really want to do that. And so his acceptance of the idea that he too should take life and embrace it fully comes later in the film, which I like that they added that dynamic just because it adds a unique perspective and really makes it significant, I guess is the word I'm looking for the audience because they need to also fully embrace this in all aspects, right? If you're going to have this idea of seizing life by its horns and moving forward, you want to, especially I think embracing an ideal or an idea in a film, you don't want to straw man it, right? You want to very
Mm,
much build it up as tightly as you can and observe it from all perspectives and say, is this legitimate? Is this not? In every situation? Really? In every situation? And Todd is like the last straw that breaks to say, this is where all the boys are going, right? And then to see the full climax of the film by the end, to see how that portrays out now that they all have embraced this, is very interesting as well. So,
yeah.
100%.
Yeah, and
Um,
it's funny when you were talking about that. Like, it just like kind of made me think. Like, this is one of the very few movies where in most movies the theme is kind of something that's like earned or learned by the end of the movie. This is one of those very unique movies where the theme is introduced very early on, like at the beginning of the plot, basically, and then it's tried and tested throughout the entirety of the movie, especially by the end.
mhm.
That's a real. I didn't even think about that. That's a great point.
Yeah. No, and and I'm sure we'll get into each character in turn. Uh, but before we get too far, because this film is such really a film about dynamics between people, right? And there's two significant things I think are worth discussing now when I would normally discuss them later. One is the character of John Keating, right? And his influence on the kids because he is the inspiration that moves them forward in the plot. And the second thing is what they are up against, whether that's the societal expectations or the specific expectations of Welton Academy as the boys' school and the overbearing demand for them to perform for the sake of their futures. What is your thoughts on John Keating, and then let's get into the conflicts that are rising against the students.
Yeah, so as a former English teacher, specifically teaching high school English,
Yeah.
I actually I remember my first exposure ever to Dead Poet Society was the famous clip of him having to tear out the pages of the book and everything. I was introduced to that in high school. I showed it to kids in high school. When I was teaching, I hadn't even watched the movie yet. So actually getting to see this movie in its entirety and
uh,
Mr. Keating in all of his full glory, I loved seeing it. Robin Williams just knocks it out of the park in this one. Like, he's so sincere. And then also what I just love about his character is that he's unpredictable in the best way, so that you can't quite pin him down because he's stern and he pushes when you don't think that he's going to push, and then he backs off and he's much more of like a calming kind of fatherly figure when you're also not expecting that. So I think he's unpredictable in the best ways.
it's so interesting to see him just because you have this background that he is come from the same school that they are all currently at, right? And he actively chose to come to this school, but at the same time, he rejects a lot of what the school is trying to push and this idea of, oh, rigorous academics, obey what we tell you to obey, believe what we tell you to believe, blah blah blah. Don't think for yourself is one of the tenets that is espoused by the other teachers at the school. And so this idea that he is wholeheartedly rejecting that is in some ways a source of conflict, but also shows this growth that he's already gone through, right? He's this character that has taken life by the horns, like he's telling everyone else to do, and has tried to embrace it, but he has temperance behind that, right? He knows when it's appropriate to fully live life, but then also to take a step back and say, this is not the time for this, right? And so he's trying to build that into boisterous young boys who want to do whatever comes to mind and say, oh, carpe diem, I'm here to live life. I can do whatever I want, right? And they feel invincible, like he says. So it's a great like middle ground, I guess, if you will, between the academy and the boys who are revolting in some ways against society in their own small way by indulging in the Dead Poets Society. So it's yeah, great character. I really like, and it's also interesting just because uh, Robin Williams is known for his comedic acting, right? He's known for being this funny guy, whether it's in Aladdin or it's in any other number of movies that he's in. And this is one of those few roles where he plays a much more serious character, and it's remarkable. I think that a couple of the other ones that I've seen with him as well have struck me the same way, that he has some really great acting in his in his more serious roles, and I don't think those get as much credit as they deserve. So this is definitely one of those.
Yeah, for sure. Like, and also I just think that's it's a common trend of like I see so many comedic actors um that like they shine when they have serious roles. It's fascinating to me. Like Steve Carell,
Hmm.
whenever he does like a
Yeah.
serious role, like Beautiful Boy or not Beautiful Boy. No, Beautiful Boy, I think.
Yeah,
The one
with
where his son,
Timothy Chalamet.
Timothy Chalamet, yeah.
Yeah,
Like that
yeah,
movie was just gut wrenching, and Steve Carell did so good. But in
yeah.
my mind, I had to get out of the mindset of Michael Scott from The Office. Like, I was like,
Right.
this is not that kind of movie. But like
Yep.
he just like shows off his acting chops by so effortlessly going into that role, and I think Robin Williams does the same thing here.
Yeah. I will say I've not watched Beautiful Boy, but I saw it pop up and went, all right, this is on the list. This is gonna happen at some point. So, yeah.
Let me know when you watch it. We can do another one of these.
Here we go. For sure. Yeah. No, but 100%, I agree with that. What are your thoughts on the Academy, right? And if there's other forces you see there too that are also, because there are other forces, maybe not as major as the Academy itself, but it's not so much that you see a specific person being the push against the kids, right? It's a whole host of things that's coming against them that's trying to get them to reject this idea of carpe diem. Did you think those were compelling? You want to? I'd love to get your thoughts as you delve into these.
Yeah, I mean, you could rename this movie "Great Expectations," because
uh,
like that's kind of the antagonist is the great expectations that are laid out for them. Um, what's really interesting about this movie is, and I was so glad when I was watching it. There's no evil mustache twirling kind of villain,
right.
like a Severus Snape from Harry Potter kind of thing. It's just
Hmm.
that every single character that they run up against, almost every single character, they do want what's best for the boys in their own minds and in their own kind of like background and thoughts. They think that they're doing what's best. I mean, you could pretty much argue that the only actual true like villain are the kids from like the public school that Knox Overstreet, fights.
Right.
But
Right.
like other than that, so much of it is just about um there's the influence of Mr. Keating, and these the voices of these poets from the past versus uh, the voices from their modern day.
Hmm.
Especially in terms of like their fathers or their school leadership,
Yeah.
and the expectations that they have for those boys because they think that for them to be successful. For them to grab life by the horns, they have to prescribe to a very specific kind of way. And it's only then through this very narrow road that they are going to have any sort of success or meaning in life. And that's something that these boys are dealing with very reactionally, sometimes in not healthy ways, sometimes in really healthy ways that encourage growth.
Yeah. Well, it's especially thinking about some of the pushing back factors here, whether it's the teachers or the parents. You get a lot of this talk around not only the expectations of being at this school, this prestigious school that everyone gets into great colleges and universities from, right? There's also this idea that we have sacrificed so much to bring you here. And so there's an expectation that you fulfill that and continue on. And this idea of, climbing the corporate ladder in some way or becoming some great figure in American life in some form or another by doing the traditional route, quote unquote, or in what they perceive to be the traditional route, is the answer. And so there's this idea of like definitely what you said, some level of tradition and expectations pushed against this idea of what does it mean to live, right? And it's very good because you can definitely see where they're coming from, and even the overbearing father. While you don't agree with Neil Perry's father and how he goes about things, because he is so overbearing and basically says, "I'm the boss, and you're going to do what I say." You can see there's a lot of this almost like desperation in his how he's going about things, and even in the side comments of the other kids, or Neil Perry, where he goes, I'm not, my parents aren't rich like the other parents are, and so I don't have a guaranteed, basically I don't have a guaranteed life if I screw around like these other guys do, and so I do need to take this seriously, but I so want to explore these other opportunities, right? And so once again, the opposite side is also strongman. They do not make it a fake facade that it's like, oh, very clearly this is the wrong option. You need to reject this. They make it, while not reasonable, they make it understandable. Let's just say, 100% agree. I think one other thing I would like to do in this review, because it has so many strong individual characters with their own stories, I think it would be worthwhile to go through each of those as it develops into the climax and conclusion of the film and just analyze them one by one. So if you're open to that, I'd love to hear your thoughts, especially on Neil Perry, because he is a locus of focus for this film. What are your thoughts on Neil Perry, as we just talked about his father and that experience, and how that grows and terminates in this film for Neil Perry?
Yeah, so Neil is absolutely my favorite. I just love his character. First of all, the acting was just incredible. You just he just makes you care so much, and it's so believable as you go through this movie. Because I remember thinking, I was like, am I going to suspend my disbelief and believe that teenage boys can get into poetry? Because it is very hard. It is
You're
very
like, I
hard.
tried.
I tried, and I was somewhat successful in some cases, but it is
Nice.
very hard.
Uh-huh.
But like again, they are so earnest, and especially Neil is so engaging, at least to me, that he totally sold me, and I was so invested in his emotional journey throughout this movie, and especially with him, going into the play and um, going to see, see Mr. Keating, especially. I think that was one of the best parts of the movie is when he goes to see Mr. Keating and he's like, should I listen to my dad? Like, should I do this? What do I do here? Because everything is set up for me to do this thing that I really want to do, but I have this very compelling voice and very compelling reason to not do it. And when he actually does it, like, it's just this insane high moment that comes crashing down immediately when he sees the dead blank stare on his father's face. Oh, it gets me every time. And then I didn't know what happens to him by the end of the movie. Um,
You mean when you first watched it?
when I first watched
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
like I knew that something bad happened to him, but I didn't know what. But then as like the night goes on after his performance, and like the very harrowing music starts to play, I got this like pit in my stomach. And then when that scene happens, when Neil unfortunately like takes his life, I I sobbed. I actually had to pause the movie because I was just sobbing for like 10 minutes straight. It was so gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
Um and then like at first I was like, well, that was kind of abrupt. And then I thought about it and I was like, no. Everything in the film has been leading towards that moment, and you can only really see it like in hindsight. It's like one of the most gut wrenching plot twists because when you look back on it, you see like all this stuff about like carpe diem, like seizing the day and everything. Um, you kind of get the sense of like, is he filled with like despair and hope that he's never going to get that again by like the end of the movie, and then having him not be in the last part of the movie, there is such a noticeable gap in the
Mm-hmm.
story. I mean, not just,
Mm-hmm.
because everyone's talking about his death and everything, but you can just feel his absence in the friend group, in their dynamics, everything. And I mean, his death also, like, basically propels the plot for the last third act of the movie.
Yeah.
So uh, his ghost in a sense is just it's always there,
Yeah.
and especially like in that last scene, that he would have been one of the first to stand up on the desks, if not the first, but
Yep.
Todd takes that place, like he
Mm-hmm.
goes into that place. Oh, it gets me. So yeah. I'm gonna I can't wait to watch this movie again now that
Yeah.
like I've seen everything that I've seen, because I just want to like go back and just like relive it, knowing it from like a different like frame of perspective.
Yeah. Yeah, well, he's such a strong character, both because, he's a ringleader in the group, right? And he has this brash, like, let's go take on the world. If anyone in the group embraces Carpe Diem, no one does it like Neil Perry does, right? He's fully invested in this. And at the same time, you see this uh, embracing of life, but also the sense in which he very much cares for the people around him. And my favorite scene with that is when Todd Anderson is writing his poetry that he has to write, and he doesn't really want to write it. And Neil's like, "Oh, check this out," and then Todd says, "No, butt out. Stay away from me. I don't want you in this." And he goes, "No, I'm not gonna do that." And it's this, while it's still fun and he's still jovial, he kind of nudges him in the elbow with his elbow and says, "Hey, come on." At the same time, it's also the sense in which I'm not going to let you just sit and wallow in this. I am embracing life, and you are going to embrace life too. And it is that sentiment that pushes the whole group forward. Is that him, and with a little bit of help from Charlie, but very much him, pushes these people into this idea that this is the path we should be taking. We should be embracing life. And so definitely when he takes his own life, it definitely really hits them hard, especially because he's having such an impact on the entire group so strongly. Um, I do also think that your note on how it ends for him is interesting, because his end is contrasted, I would say, to the other students, right? Because he has his father come and say, "You were in this play. I said you couldn't be in this play. You're done. You're going to military boarding school or some other school, and that's happening tomorrow because I'm not going to let you throw your life away." And it's in some ways reflecting on the book that I keep referencing, and I can't think of the author's name right now, but where it more or less says, "I went out to the woods to be alive, more or less, and to uh, basically drink of life deeply and suck the marrow out of the bones," and that whole phraseology, right? To basically look at life and say that I had lived at the end of the day. And that's the almost like the question that you're left with at the end is, why did he take his own life? Is there this idea that he had already taken the most that he could, he thought, out of life, and that, or that he wanted to end his life on that note, that he had embraced life fully in that moment when he had gotten into the play and done what he loved and fully embraced it, and he thought that there was no better opportunity? Or was he disillusioned? Was he someone who's like, maybe Keating lied to me, and this isn't actually, that you can't, when you take life by the horns, like he said, it only ends in you not getting what you really want out of life, and so it's what I lived is a lie. What do you think of that? Do you think that one of those is more true than the other?
Yeah, so that's a fascinating question because there is a really strong amount of ambiguity in that. Um, like they leave enough wiggle room for you to have multiple interpretations about why he took his own life.
Yeah,
And um I mean, me personally, just from what I saw in the movie, I am kind of in the camp that he had tasted and like he'd seen how like life could be if he had, had that like carpe diem mentality. And then when he learned that it was going to be taken away, I don't think that he, in his mind, I don't think that he could handle that anymore. I think that's kind of like the headspace that he got into. He's like, how am I going to live the rest of my life knowing that I'm missing out on something? Because at first he didn't really know about, like, because he was talking about like how he didn't know how liberating or how fun and enjoyable the theater experience is. And then when he finally experiences that, it's immediately ripped away. And so I think at that point, he's just like distraught with that he's possibly never going to have that sort of mentality. I think that he's looking in the future and he's like, the things that I love and like the spark that I have is going to be stamped out. And he just like basically runs away from that. And I think that just adds to this gut wrenching tragedy of his emotional arc. And so it's whenever you're watching the last part of the movie and they start talking about um is Mr. Keating's like influence like bad on the boys, like did he was he the one that caused this suicide? Oh, that is like the worst question that you could ask. And I'm sure that's something that Mr. Keating asks himself because, especially in that tearjerker scene where he goes to Neil's desk, gets out the book that he gave him, and just breaks down. Oh, like you kind of like are asking yourself the same question, like, I mean, because here's the thing is that he Keating should have said all that stuff. Like he should have, said like seize the day, and he didn't do anything wrong
Right.
in what he said or what he taught. But
Hmm.
unfortunately, it just the way that this situation happened, it brought about, I think, a very unfortunate end. And no one wanted that end, but it
Yeah.
happened nonetheless. And
Hmm.
so it comes to this very it's there's no clear or easy answer in this. And I think that's part of what makes this movie so powerful and so mature. Um, and it's something that everyone in the film has to consider.
Yeah. Yeah. Like what was his ultimate despair, if you will, is definitely a thought-provoking aspect to it, and it's something in some ways that the boys have to struggle with too. And there you see that with Todd when he's like he wouldn't have killed himself, it had to be his father and whatever, and it was an unreasonable response, right? But at the same time it was born from emotion and also grounded in this idea that like we knew who he was, how like what was going on in his mind, right? And while that's not fully answered, you get this aspect of just how much of a turn that was for him compared to the person that he was in their presence. And you get that too because there is some doubt caused to it in another degree in which he's talking about a lot in the film about confronting his father, and his friends say, "Oh, you need to tell him the truth, tell him how you feel." And he's like, "I can't do that. You guys won't even do that. Don't tell me what to do. You guys wouldn't even do it yourselves." And they go, "Yeah, you're right. We wouldn't do that." And so when he's faced with that situation at the end, right before he decides to take his own life, he tells his dad, "Hey, listen to me." And then he goes, "All right, I'm going to listen." And he has that opportunity to speak out, and he doesn't. And his father ends up filling the void with more condemnation, more "you are doing the wrong thing. Nope, you're going to do it my way or the highway." And so you don't get this completion, I guess, to that aspect of his life where he doesn't take the or like the tough responsibility of dealing with his father and how his father's worldview clashes with his own and trying to confront that and come to terms with that. He doesn't really do that to the full extent, and so it leaves a huge gap in its wake where he can't deal with it. So there's definitely a lot going on there, and I think the ambiguity is not it's not bad, but it definitely leaves a lot on the table for people to think about.
Yeah, for
Cool.
sure.
Well, what are your thoughts on Todd Anderson? He's the other roommate
Yeah.
in that group. He's the
He's like the
quieter
flip side of
one.
the coin of this. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, Todd was actually probably part of the reason I like couldn't give this a perfect 9 score. I totally understand what they were doing with making him like very closed off. Um, but I guess, and again, I can see what they were doing and I think I appreciate it, but I just wanted to know Todd more. I wanted to know more about what made him like ticked, because you spend so much of the time with Knox and with Charlie and with Neil, and you really get a sense of like what's going on. And then by the end of the movie, you could argue that Todd is very much so like the main character in that last third, um, because he's the one most emotionally affected. He has like the most growth, especially by the end. Um, so it's just like, again, I understand the reasoning behind it. And I do like it in a sense, but I just really wish I could have seen more of Todd because I think that he was missing so much. I mean, there was one point, I think it was like halfway through the movie, where I was literally thinking, I was like, wait, I haven't seen Todd in like 4 scenes. I
Right.
was like, wait, where is he? Is
Yeah,
he
yeah.
okay? Like, is he
Yeah,
alive?
right.
And so yeah, I would have liked to have seen more of him in there, even not like necessarily, he doesn't have to like give some sort of like monologue about his inner workings or anything like that. I just wish we could have seen a bit more of uh where he was at in his headspace so that we could have seen more of the growth, I guess.
Yeah, and there's definitely not the main things is his personal growth, right? Being able to truly experience life and to take on carpe diem, but then also in regards to him being able to stand up for himself, right? And one of those big points in the film comes after Neil Perry's death, where they are having everyone sign this form that basically says John Keating is the reason that Neil Perry is dead, and he's a bad teacher, and he will make him the scapegoat and pin everything on him, right? And there's a lot of forces against the kids in this situation because, one, they can't bring their friend back. Two, someone has to get in trouble. And you get this from one of the other characters in the film, namely Cameron, where he says, they're already going to get him. They already know everything. You might as well save yourself. And then there's a sense in which they're asking themselves, do I sacrifice myself on this altar for something that I know is true, right? That John Keating isn't truly responsible for this for the sake of losing everything else, right? And then they add to that by him walking into the room and his parents are sitting there and they have the external pressure of the parents saying, sign this paper. You need to sign this paper, right? You don't have an option, right? Is the impression they're being given by the parents. And so Todd Anderson gets all of this pressure to do this, and he's trying to find a way out. And he's asking, what are they going to do to Mr. Keating? And they say, sign the paper, just sign the paper, right? At the end of the day, he looks down and he sees that all of his friends, except for one, all of his friends had signed the paper. And so what does he do? He signs it. And it's just so much going on there where you see him regretting that. But at the same time, it comes to a conclusion, a wonderful conclusion where he takes on what Neil, like you said, what Neil probably would have done. He gets on the table and he says, oh, Captain, my Captain, and he gives him that farewell salute, if you will, saying, I respect you, I believe in you, I don't think you did anything wrong, and like you are genuinely a great person who has highly influenced my life for the better. I don't know if you have more to add to that.
No, I think you actually summarized it like perfectly. I was like, dang, I don't have anything to add to this.
Yeah. I mean, no, he's great. He's not. I can see where you're coming from, right? Where it's like he could have had more development. I'm not sure what I would do necessarily to fix that.
Yeah, I'm not sure either. Ethan Hawke is just such a good actor.
Right.
He's just such a good actor. I'm like, I'm not going to say no to more Ethan Hawke.
Right.
Yeah.
And I did like the Yop scene too, where he changes and is he doesn't want to read the poetry, and then more or less Keating pulls it out of him as he's in the middle of the classroom and says, see, you are a poet. What are you talking about? You are a Loverboy at heart. You love to exist and live and truly live. And it's good.
That scene in itself is like a masterclass in filmmaking, with everything with like the cinematography and like the tracking shot as they're going around. Oh, it's just so good.
Yeah, 100%. What are your thoughts on... let's see. Let's talk about Knox Overstreet. He takes a very different aspect of Carpe Diem. What are your thoughts on him?
Don't get me wrong. His story is written well. It's written very well. I personally just could not vibe with Knox Overstreet. I don't know why. Also, maybe just because like his love interest, I'm blanking on her name right now. I just found her just so not compelling. I was like, really? Her? This is the one you're chasing after? But no, like Knox is perfectly fine. And again, I like how his embracing of Carpe Diem, it's on a very small, it's a small but not unimportant like micro level. It's very kind of, puppy love, teenager romance, high school romance, not rival schools, but like two different schools, very different vibes, and they're still trying to meet each other like in the snow. It's adorable. Yeah, but like it's I don't know. I was much more invested in all of the other things going on, that like Knox's storyline kind of every time I like went back to it, I was like, Okay, here we go. He's
Right,
trying to get
right,
the girl. But again,
right.
nothing against it, because again, it's a perfect way of like showing carpe diem on a much more like kind of micro scale, like a
Yeah,
little petri dish of carpe diem.
right. And I think his character more than anything is fleshing out the idea of carpe diem, and it's like, would you do this for the sake of what your future holds for Neil, or for your own inner fears for Todd, or for love for Knox, right? And it's very stereotypical. You get into the more classic romance type genre story there for that one. So yeah, I could see how it gets very stock, and I'd agree. I think what's her name, Claire, or whatever her name is.
I'm
Um,
blanking. I think it's Claire.
yeah, something like that. She's not the most compelling character, but she
Yeah,
adds
yeah,
that dynamic to the degree that it's necessary for telling the story. And he's
exactly.
another one of those characters who, he's doesn't want to sign the paper, but then he ends up signing it, right? And then at the end of the story, he stands up with Todd and says, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," for Keating as he walks out the door. So he also looks to say, in my life too, you have made my life better by encouraging me to embrace life to the fullest.
And I love how his story ends, where it's like, um, it doesn't really end that way, but like there's a really powerful moment in the movie where he's like, she was thinking about me, like she invited me to the party, and they're like, yeah, so, and he's like, well, it doesn't matter, like
Uh huh.
even if I don't go to the party or if I do, she was thinking about me, and I called and reached out to her, kind of deal. Like he's so happy, like for himself, that he took that step, that he had that kind of mentality. That's something that can stay with him. And I think, because not many high school romances, last, for a lifetime. But
Right.
that's something that like that it's kind of like a life lesson that he can learn through it, that he can take with him.
Right. Right.
And I also will add, like, just this is a very personal thing. Nothing with the movie. I also hate like secondhand embarrassment. And so much so much of
True.
Knox's plotline was just secondhand embarrassment. I was
Yeah.
like, stop,
Yeah.
please.
Yep. When he's at the party and he leans down to kiss her on the forehead,
Oh
you're like,
no, I
no,
was I
don't
was
do
I was like
that.
cringing. I was like, no, please.
Yeah, I would agree with that. That was a little cringe, but
Yep.
classic high schooler to do something cringy like
Exactly.
that.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? I would love to get your thoughts on the rest of the characters, whether that's Meeks or Cameron or Pitts, and then finish off with Charlie Dalton and then Keating.
Yeah. No. I think that Meeks is a very interesting character. Charlie's my second favorite. But I think Meeks is very interesting because like you have to have like I was very glad that they had at least one character that was kind of on board with it, but like when it came down to it was like like for better or for worse, I'm going with what the school says because I'm going with what is expected of me. And the expectations that are placed on me because that's very realistic. Like you
Right.
wouldn't have like the entire group be like totally 100% committed to this cause. And again, like unfortunately, Meeks makes a good point towards the end of the movie where
I
he's
believe you
like,
might be talking about Cameron, actually. Meeks
sorry,
is
I
like
am,
the
yeah, no,
brainchild guy. Yeah, but
I
yes,
am
keep
talking
you're
about
you're still
Cameron.
right. You're still right. Keep going.
I am talking about Cameron. My bad. I got the names mixed up. So
You're
yeah,
good.
I'm talking about Cameron. And Cameron does make a very good point where he's like, unfortunately, like they are going to find a scapegoat no matter what. And like nothing we can do is going to change that now. So are we going to fall on our own sword or are we
Yeah.
just, going to do what we came here for and basically like be successful in life? Um, so yeah, I think that he was a very uh, realistic, interesting kind of dynamic that was necessary to be thrown into the mix.
Yeah, and to really give that full-fledged perspective on the whole thing, right? He wants to live life and he will, but at the end of the day, the utilitarian way, right? What should I actually do in this situation to protect myself and my parents' investment? I need to put it on this guy.
Yeah,
So,
and unfortunately, it's so easy to like because I remember when I watched this, I was like, oh man, I hate that kid. I'm like so mad at it. And then I like thought about it. I'm like, but at the same time, he's a 17-year-old kid, and we all do that at some point. Like we all go the selfish utilitarian route where like this is like I have like these ideals I want to strive for, but like there's the tempting offer of what is easy and like a paved path of well, like uh that would just be easy to go down. So I understand like where he's coming from. He's very easy to blame, and I
Hmm.
think that's also kind of the point is that would you when it came down to it, would you be the same though?
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a very fair question because a lot of people have the ideals, right? This is what I want to do. And in some ways, he also contrasts with Neil, where Neil is fully invested in this idea of living life to the fullest no matter what. And Cameron is much more practical about it and goes, what is realistic here? And those two ideas, I mean, he survives, Neil doesn't. Is there something to be said for that? That's kind of the point that he's making, and
I mean, you
it has
even
to be
see it
considered.
when they start to have the Dead Poet Society, like the first meetings. He's the only one asking, like, what happens if we get caught? How are we going to get out of this school at night? Like, he's actually asking the important questions of that time. Like, yeah, you kind of do need to think about this before you break out, kind of deal.
Right. Right. You don't want to just throw it all on the line.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. What are your thoughts on Charlie Dalton? You gave us a little bit of a sneak peek. You like this
Yeah.
character. Why
I
is that?
love I loved his character. First of all, because he's just such a funny little. He's such an incendiary character. He just
Uh-huh.
likes to
Uh-huh.
instigate things, and it
Yep.
makes me laugh every single time. But also, like, there is such depth to him too, because he's not like. Because I remember when the movie started, I was like, oh gosh, is this kid gonna be like that annoying kind of like Draco Malfoy kind of prick?
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was like kind of worried that he was just gonna be like shallow. But no, like he had like actual like depth to him, and he was also like what we've been talking about. He took the theme of the movie, went too far with it, and um, Keating was like, all right, I see where you're coming from. Rein it back in. And also, what I loved about his character is that he's the only one that didn't sign that.
Yep.
As much as I love Todd, Todd
Hmm.
signed it, but Charlie was
Yeah.
the one who stuck to his guns and actually
Hmm.
was willing to be expelled from the school just so that he could get a knock in on Cameron.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, he's what I love about Charlie is that like he's such a 100% or nothing character. Like whenever he makes a decision, he goes for it. Like 100%. And I think that was and that could be like both like a very positive thing and also a very negative thing as you see multiple times throughout the movie. So I thought that was just a fascinating like he was basically a character study in and of himself.
Yeah. And you see his transformation in the one pithy thing he keeps saying in the film, and he says the name is Nwanda, right? And he gave himself this fake name, but it was in some ways encapsulating this aspect of him where he goes, "I'm all in." And he goes, "I'm part of the Dead Poets Society, and I am Nwanda, and I go all the way. I live life to the fullest." And whenever he's being questioned about something, he says, "Well, my name's Nwanda." And what does Nwanda do? He goes all the way. He goes, "Oh, it's God. He said you should let girls into the school," right? And it's like, okay, there's Nwanda going at it again. And you even see that when he has the confrontation with Cameron, where Cameron is saying, "You all need to sign this paper," and then Charlie slugs him in the face, right? And it's like, oh my gosh, this guy's going at it. And then Cameron says, "You just signed your expulsion papers, Nwanda," right? And he's trying to throw it back in his face and says, this is what living life to the fullest does to you. Screw you. That's basically what he's getting from Cameron. And so even with that, he fully accepts it. And I 100% agree that the idea that he is just um, taking everything and he does not compromise on what he decides to do is something admirable about his character, as extreme as his character is.
Yeah. And I he always just throws in this fun dynamic because in the end like Neil is like the ringmaster, but he's a very like he knows when to be like gentle with Todd. He knows like, you can tell that he very much so has like the best interest of others at heart. He's a very like kind-hearted soul. And Charlie definitely like does care about other people, but he's very much like doing his own thing on his own
Yeah.
path, and he just throws this fun mix into every single scene that he's in. And I also just love when he has like these moments where you see this sad depth to him. Like especially like first of all when he's getting like paddled by the principal, like he just has this like horrifying like kind of dead look to his eyes. But there's also like a part where like in the cave in the Dead Poet Society meeting where he's just like going off on the saxophone, and it's actually like a very like soulful like amazing thing that he's doing, and everyone's just kind of like sitting there like, okay, dang.
Yeah.
Like these like moments of sincerity and vulnerability that shine through that just make his character so multifaceted. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. He's definitely admirable. And I think between him and Neil, they really breathe life into the idea of carpe diem, live life. They are the ones that are fully going at it. So it's great, and he's super fun too. So he just adds to the
Yeah.
dynamic of the film. What are your thoughts on Keating to close this whole loop?
Yeah, to close the whole loop, I think that Keating is very interesting in that he is a flat character. I mean, it's not that he's like totally flat or static, because I think that sometimes those uh denotations can be a little um negative, or they imply negativity, but some characters don't necessarily have a lot of growth, and that's not a bad thing, and I think that's very much so speaks to Keating. He basically starts and ends the movie in the same place where he's like, I know that what I did was I tried to make these boys' lives better. Um, and I find that really fascinating. You don't get like some sort of dramatic backstory with him. I mean, you get a sense of things from here and there, um, but it doesn't like venture super hard into um, why he started the original Dead Poet Society, or like all the information about like its backstory and everything. It's mostly about him just trying to hand on things to the new generation, and I love that he is such a giving character. Like in every single scene that he's in, he's just trying to give something. He's not getting anything. Um, he's always trying to either like impart life lessons or actual skills or knowledge to the students. And he also like says, they ask him like, why did you come back to this school? Like he knew that he knew how Welton ran. He knew that he was going to ruffle feathers, and he knew that he wasn't going to have the easiest time, but he came anyways. And they ask him why, and he's like, because I want to, teach you guys what I love, and basically make your lives better. And he's like always constantly showing up there for his students, into the night. Like they talk about his living arrangements and how his living arrangements are tiny, but he doesn't really care. Like because he's just always looking to how he can give to other students. And I don't know, I find that really admirable. Especially like coming from a teaching background. Sometimes it's a very thankless job, and he embraces, I think, what a lot of teachers want to embody, which is just that kind of servant mentality.
Yeah. Yeah. And for his individual minor growth, if you will. I mean, I would agree he doesn't have much growth in this film, but it does surround that question to some degree, where he has poured so much into these kids, and then one of his students dies, and there's a sense in which when he's crying over the book that he's given to the student that when Neil had killed himself, he's wondering like, did I do everything okay? I mean, he actively tried. He told him like, did you talk to your father? You need to confront this. And Neil lied to him and said, yeah, I did, and he was fine with it. And so in the audience's mind, and I'm sure in his mind too, you get the idea that he genuinely was trying to protect him. He wasn't trying to get him to do something that was against rules or going to harm relationships in any way. He was encouraging him to do the right thing, and yet he's still getting blamed for the consequences of what occurred. And
Exactly.
this all, I'm sure, would be pouring into someone in wondering, like, am I responsible in some way for what occurred? Which is why it's so significant to him, even, that all of those kids get on top of their desks and say, "Oh, Captain, my Captain," because it's affirming to him that he did the right thing and that he was the teacher that every student wants, who breathes life into their existence and encourages them to live life to the fullest.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you put it amazingly. Because like I just find his character utterly fascinating in that like again, you expect maybe like some sort of like growth or maybe like negative growth, like disillusionment. And again, he doesn't have that in the end. He's like, no, you know what? I actually I'm kind of confronted that question, and I found that, I did, and I'm going to keep doing what I need to do. And also like what's fascinating too, and I think what just adds to the angst, I guess, of the last third of the movie, and what adds to the frustration for the viewer is that they are making Keaton sound like he's some sort of revolutionary, that
Right.
he's trying to get these kids to do terrible things
Right.
and rebel against their parents, and meanwhile he's actively trying to get Neil to open communication with his father, to respect his father's wishes. And he's talking to the students like, hey, you need to, obey the school's rules. And if you really do want to change things healthily from within. Um, he basically like, embodied the spirit of the school, but in a much like healthier, less rigid way. But there was just blindness in seeing that, and it just makes you kind of like attached to Keating as a character even more.
Yeah. 100%. And that's pretty much how the film ends. You get that dramatic ending where they salute him more or less as he exits the scene, and then the film ends. Did you feel like there was a satisfying conclusion to this film? Did it cause you to reflect on the ideas of the film? Like, how do you think the movie left you satisfied?
I think it was the perfect ending because like, and when I say the perfect ending, I mean that if it had been like a minute or so longer, I don't think it would have worked. And if it had been a minute or so shorter, I don't think it would have worked. I think you need every single part of that last scene, starting with all like the sad, ashamed looks, and then the catharsis of Neil being the first one to stand on the seat, and then all the other students standing on their seat, um, and you kind of get like a little bit of that emotional satisfaction from seeing the headmaster like screaming at them and having no control. So you just get so much catharsis from that last scene. And I think if you had ended any earlier, you wouldn't have had any sort of like closure for Neil's death or Keating leaving. Because you learn about him leaving, I think, like 10 minutes before that. And then
Right,
it's referenced much earlier than that.
right.
Um, and then especially with like if you had extended that to have any other scene afterwards, it would have, I think it just would have killed the poignancy of that last shot. Showing Todd like looking at him standing on the desk. If you had added any other word other than that at the end, it just would have killed it. So yeah,
Yeah,
I thought the end of this movie was just perfect.
yeah. Well, and I agree. It's one of those few movies where I looked at it at the end, and two things come to mind, right? The idea is exactly like you're saying, that it leaves you in the emotion in the moment when it needs it most, right? You're sitting there and you go, yes, there's so much sacrifice that can happen from seizing the day, but it's worth it, right? It's worth it to embrace life for all of its joys and all of its sorrows and all of the pain and suffering that might come about. It is worth experiencing life for the full time that you have it here. And as he walks away, it leaves you with that. And the second thing it does for me is it makes me go, yes, I need to seize the day too. What am I doing? I need to like
Exactly.
live life to the fullest. And I think when they leave you with an emotion like that, That's a very good sign that they have really given you something to think about and inspired you to carry that forward. Even if it's just for the next few days and then you forget about it, it still is having some impact on you in a positive way, which is, I think that's what a good story should be trying to do, is leaving you with something like that. So,
Yeah, exactly. And also, like, the thing with this kind of movie is that, so much of the movie is just like these heartfelt, great moments, followed by this, like, crushing darkness. And so by the time you get to the end of the movie, having another lighthearted moment, you have the real danger of it feeling like fake, or feeling like, it's kind of like a cop out or like a joke attached to the end of the movie or whatever. But no, this final scene, like, the uplifting kind of thing the uplifting feeling that it leaves us with is very hard won. And it's like we understand the emotion and the sacrifice behind it. And that's what I love.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you have final thoughts on the film? Would you change your rating? Anything you would want to leave the audience with on your thoughts on the Dead Poets Society?
I think I'd leave my rating exactly where it is, 8.55. That's the magic number for this. For my closing thoughts on this movie, I feel like everyone, but especially every guy, should watch this movie at least once in their life. I think it just asks so many kind of like timeless questions about how do we go forward living in life from day to day? What does it mean to be a man? There's so many good things in this movie. I think everyone should watch it once, for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm so mad that it took me this long.
Yeah, what's going on, bro? Yeah. I mean, I haven't seen Beautiful Boy, so I guess I might be saying the same thing to myself.
There we go.
Yeah. No, I'd agree. It's a great film. Everyone should watch it. I think just under an 8 is a high praise. I really like it. I will watch it again, for sure, at some point. I'll drag one of my other co-hosts in and force him to watch it or something. This is a great film, and I really enjoy every time I watch it. So, definitely worth your time. And that just about does it. And if any of you have listened to us at all, you know that Jared is a writer himself. He tells stories, and that's what we really love to see. Jared, if anyone wants to find some of your work, I know that you somewhat recently released an audio version of your short story that was released. Where can people find that? Where can they find you? All of that good stuff.
Yeah, so you can find me at jared.stonefield on Instagram. I also have a website, jaredstonefield.com. Pretty straightforward. So yeah, you can find information about short stories that I've written. I have audiobooks that I'm putting out. Basically, it's the audio versions of my short stories, and some information about my debut novel I'm trying to get an agent for. So lots of fun, good stuff going on.
Yeah, there you go. So give him the like, give him the follow, like and subscribe to Jared this time. You like and follow us next time. But that's the pod. We hope you all enjoyed. We will be back, as we always are, next week. We'll see you all then.